Chris Goodrum. As you can see, back in the kitchen again. Shouldn't be too much longer before my hiatus from the study comes to an end. Hopefully the end of the month. Certainly that's the plan anyway. But of course, obviously plans do tend to change from time to time. And but yeah, that's what we're aiming for. But today, so. Right, as you can see, I've got rather a large amount of samples in front of me, a little bit, one more than what I normally tend to do. Now, that's because it's the Spirit of Yorkshire's fault. I wanted to do an English episode of the show for quite a while. As you know, big fan of English whiskey, and why should the Scots have all the fun at the end of the day? And there's still this kind of like, I don't know, misguided belief that only Scotland creates whiskey. I still hear it from time to time, not as much as what I used to be fair. And so it's kind of my job to educate people that there are distilleries outside of Scotland, and there are quite a number of distilleries in England now, which is really, really cool. So I wanted to do an English episode of the show, and I had intended to use two of last year's new releases in inverted commas that I never got round to sort of shoehorning into an episode of the show from the Spirit of Yorkshire Distillery in their Filey Bay range. And then the buggers go and bloody well release a new one yesterday, and I'm thinking, well, I've got to cram that in, and so anyway, look, I've got 7. This might be a slightly longer episode than usual, so I'll try and speed it up. So I'm not going to say too much apart from we're looking at 3 distilleries, obviously, as I've just mentioned, the Spirit of Yorkshire Distillery. So a big thank you to them for the sample or the samples for that they've kindly sent me. We're looking at a new range from the Copper Rivet Distillery in Kent. Under their Malt Masthouse label. Big thank you to Cask Liquid Marketing for the samples for those, and I'm also going to be looking at the White Peak Distillery, obviously just up the road in Derbyshire, and their inaugural Wireworks release. So big thank you to my good friend Shane for that sample. So like I said, I'm not going to say too much about the distilleries. You can find out all their information online, and the links are obviously in the box below. So I'm just going to get on with letting you know what I'm tasting today. Right, okay, so we're going to kick off with the Copper Rivet Distillery. So this is their Masthouse range. The first one we're going to be looking at is a pot and column distilled grain whiskey made from a mash of wheat, barley and rye, so should be interesting. Then we're going to move on to their single malt, the first one being their pot and column distilled single malt, bottled at 45%. Don't know why 45%. Why not just go 46%? I mean, I don't get that, but there's obviously a reasoning behind that, I suppose. And bottling number 3 we'll be looking at is the Masthouse pot still distilled single malt. So going to be interesting. I think the distillery is fairly young, so I don't think that any of these samples have got a great deal of age. Likewise with the White Peaks, which is their inaugural first release of the Wireworks bottling, Bourbon and STR casks, batch number 01/2022, and like I said, it was bottled in January of this year. Then we're going to look at the 3 samples from Spirit of Yorkshire Distillery. The first one we'll be looking at is the IPA Finish. I think that's fairly self-explanatory, isn't it? So this is obviously batch number 1 and was bottled at 46%. The brand spanking new release, which was only, well, it was actually, the whiskey was actually sent out before the official release, but the official release was yesterday, so it is incredibly new, and hopefully this will probably be the first review of said bottling. This is their double cask. Now, I have the notes here. So it's 53% column still and 47% pot still, so lovely sort of synergy between them and Copper Rivet. I don't know whether their other bottlings have the same kind of ratio. I would imagine so, given that they've obviously decided on that distillery character, and as you well know, I've done an episode of the show on Filey Bay before. So this was casks that were distilled in or laid down in 2017, 2018, originally in ex-American oak before being transferred into lightly charred virgin oak. So hence why it's called double oak batch number 1. So yeah, that could be interesting. And look at the colour on that, will you? I don't know if you can quite see that. But it is a real sort of coppery kind of goldy colour. It's a lovely colour, it has to be said. And the third sample from the distillery, and the final sample for today would be the Moscatel Finish batch number 2, again bottled at 46%. So there you go. That's this week's lineup. Let's kick off with a bit of Copper Rivet then, shall we? Okay, so let's see what the pot and column distilled grain gives us on the nose then. It's quite grainy. I mean, so that's kind of a good thing. It's very sort of typical of what it is. It's young. It's got a touch of dried fruit, coconut, toffee. It's got the wheaty fullness with a little bit of rye spice. It's young, it's got character, it's not spirity, it's got a bit of weight. I'm guessing the pot still distilled character or distilled element is giving it some more weight. So it's kind of, I suppose they're getting away with bottling it at a relatively young age because of that. I mean, yeah, it's pleasant. It's a lovely nose at the end of the day. Let's look at the pass right. Full, very wheaty, touch of rye spice coming through on the middle, dried column still fruits, sultana, sort of apricot, lighter end of the spectrum, a little short, a little young, a little bit of spice, a little bit of oak, not a huge amount of oak. It's pleasant. Now they make this bold claim that this redefines grain whiskey. Don't know about that, to be honest with you. I mean, okay, so the redefinition is they've used a pot and a column still. It hasn't, I mean, yeah, all right, it has impacted the flavour a bit. Like I say, it's given it some weight that it ordinarily probably wouldn't have had. But to say it redefines it, stretching it a little bit. But I will say it's pleasant, and yeah, it's a good starter, I think. Right, okay, so let's move on to the pot and column distilled single malt. Let's see what the nose gives us on this one, shall we? No, that's very fruity. They've obviously gone down the Filey Bay route. They've obviously gone down the Macmyra route. You know, estery, fruity, pear drops, acetone, bubblegum. Now, I do like this style of whiskey. I mean, I much prefer this to the more, shall we say, traditional industrial style of whiskey, but it's just a little too confected. There's some almost kind of hoppy IPA notes. It's just a little bit too sweet. I'm getting a little bit of column still dried fruit, but obviously we can see from this bottling where the distillery has decided to set its stall out. So it's not an unusual distillation. It's not an unusual process, to be honest with you. So it's a long wort fermentation, probably a cooler wort fermentation. Fruity esters produce, you know, a spirit that's ready for bottling around about 3-4 years old. You know, it's a lot of distilleries are at it, shall we say? And you know, like I said, I like that estery style of whiskey, but for me, it's just moving into a slightly too confected area for me on the nose. So pass that. A little bit more barley, a little bit more grip on the palate. Finish is a little bit sweet, a little cloying. I mean, there is a touch of sort of citrus there, just kind of trying to balance up the finish. A little bit of a nip as well from the column still. Again, at the finish, I just think it's kind of, maybe the balance is slightly out here. Maybe it's a little too confected. Like I said, the palate is more barley orientated with less of the overt sort of estuary fruit, but it's still a bit bubblegummy. It's a bit sweet. It's a bit short. Yes, there's a bit of a nip. There's a bit of citrus in the finish, but overall, I mean, it's interesting. It's work in progress. I think it needs to be refined a little bit, but I really think that the distillery, shall we say, appears to be on the right track. So yeah, okay.
This wicked game, this wicked game.
Right, okay, so let's move on to the pot still distilled single malt. Okay, I'm confused. Where's the estuary fruit? Where's all that sort of slightly bubblegummy, confected fruit? I'm getting sort of oily barley, faints. I'm getting rose petal mar, a bit of Turkish delight. I mean, this is now, you know, it's possible that this was an early batch where they've kind of changed the fermentation. They've changed distillation techniques, possibly. But I was expecting sort of at least some kind of continuity between the pot and column distilled single malt and this, but there isn't. It's totally different. So I'm now kind of confused because I don't know what the character of the distillery is trying to go for. Is it this? Is it slightly sort of heavier, weightier? And if it is, this is just going to need a lot more time in the oak because this has been bottled far too soon. Or is the sort of the pot and column still the current style they're working on? I mean, I don't know. I'm confused now. I mean, you could argue it probably doesn't take a lot to confuse me, but I am completely confused. Right, let's try the palate. That's a bit raw, even at 45%. Yeah, okay, so oily, fainty, Turkish delight, rose petal mar, barley, not a great deal of other character, it has to be said. It's kind of a little bit disappointing after the pot and the column still bottling. And like I said, I don't know which is indicative of the style of the distillery. It's kind of confused me completely. And I'm certain that if it's confusing me, it's going to confuse the hell out of sort of, you know, the consumer. So I don't understand what's going on here. If this is the style that the distillery are aiming for, then it needs a lot more time in the oak, and it needs a little bit more active oak as well. I'm not getting any oak character whatsoever. If the pot and column still is the current style that they're working on, then fine. But yeah, if that's, yeah, I'm not keen on that one at all. Like I said, too young. Right, okay, so let's move on to the White Peak. So again, use of STR casks is very in vogue. It's very de rigueur, as they say these days. Gives you a bit of sort of like spiciness, a bit of sort of like wininess. Gives you some tannin, sometimes too much tannin. But anyway, let's see what the nose is about. Okay, so it's young, it's cereally. There's a little bit of Turkish delight. Plenty of vanilla. It's got a lovely sweetness to it. Barley. Not getting too much grippy tannin. There's a bit of tannin, a little bit of wine cask note. A little bit of smoke, a little bit of peat possibly. It certainly seems to imply that there's a slight earthiness, possibly. Maybe a little astringency. I must admit, I don't know whether they peaked the barley at White Peaks. Probably should have done the research, but yeah, it's a nice nose. I mean, it's not sort of too young. It's young, but not too young, like I said. It's got character. It's got plenty going on. I mean, I must admit, I was expecting a little bit more from the STR cask. It's very, very subtle. Obviously, as we know, sort of STR casks can impart an awful lot of bitter tannins. So maybe they've erred really on the side of caution with the use of them, to the point where it's really, really too subtle, possibly. I don't know. Am I kind of being a little bit picky here? I don't know. Overall, I like the nose. I think the nose is really good. So that's fine. Youthful, earthy, touch of Turkish delight, plenty of barley. Again, STR casks are quite subtle. It's a little bitter in tannin coming through on the finish. It's got a little bit of grippiness and some earth. Again, there's an almost kind of peaty note. Sort of dried licorice, kind of peat, earth, soot maybe. Well, it's got plenty of character. It's got a very kind of it's a modern naturalistic kind of character, I would say. It's certainly sort of, like I said, barley emphasised, but not traditional, if you see what I mean, in that kind of manner. There's certainly no kind of hard industrial notes. It's got a pleasant character, it has to be said. It's young, it's work in progress. I think it's going to be interesting to see how this develops over time. Yeah, I quite like that. That's pretty good. Okay, so let's move on to the IPA cask. Like I said, I forgot to mention that the White Peaks bottling was at 50.3%. Don't think there was any real need for water, which is hence why I didn't bother putting any with it, and it would have made the show even longer if I had done. So anyway, let's move on to the Filey Bay IPA Finish. Let's see what the nose gives on this end, shall we? Classic distillery character, very estery, pineapple, white fruit. Again, just the right side of confected for me. Again, pear drops. Got a lovely sort of fresh, hoppy IPA kind of note coming through. A little bit of sweet vanilla, a little bit of honey. Lovely, soft, fruity, generous, really well balanced. That's a lovely nose. So pass on. Full, estery, fruity, hops bitter a little bit on the mid palate, but that's kind of counterbalancing the sweetness and the estery fruit. Again, pineapple, apricot, white fruit, good length, a little bit of spice coming through on the finish, subtle oak, balanced oak. I like that. That's really very, very good. And it seems to me, from tasting the Spirit of Yorkshire's bottlings, that they have got the art of the finishing absolutely down to a T. Hasn't, I think, had very long in the IPA cask, 6 months or so, I would guess, probably, because it's really well balanced, it's not overdone. Yeah, that's good. Okay, so let's move on to the double oak, so 46%. Let's see what nose gives us on this end, shall we? Virgin oak is very, very noticeable. It's up front, it's grippy, spicy. It's got a kind of, almost kind of French oak tannin character. But again, the spirit is really standing up to it. Again, it's kind of almost emphasised the fruitiness, emphasised that sort of estery, pear, white fruit, apple, touch of vanilla, a little bit of soft vanilla coming through now, charred oak notes. Yeah, that's a big nose, but it's balanced as well. That's really gorgeous. I mean, it's really getting spicy now. You can really smell that new oak spice and that toastiness. Almost, like I say, almost reminds me of toasted French oak more than toasted. I mean, it might be virgin French oak. I don't know. I just know it's virgin oak. I mean, I would imagine it's probably American white oak, but I could be wrong. It's certainly got that really toasty character, which is quite a surprise considering it's only lightly charred, but you know, lovely. I love this. This is gorgeous. Let's see what it passes like. Up front, toasty oak again. Estery, apricot, pineapple, unsweetened pineapple, barley coming through, spices move through sort of on the mid palate and kind of linger, a little bit of vanilla, it's really polished, again toasty, slightly herbal, distinct new oak. I mean, it's got new oak stamped all over this, which is good. And again, really nicely balanced, very toasty. But to like this particular whiskey, you're going to have to like your oak because it is very much oak centric. But like I said, it's really balanced. You get the spirit character, you get the distillery character. They've really kind of monitored how this sort of what this French oak or what this virgin oak, sorry, has done to the spirit, and they've bottled it, really well. Like I said, they seem to be quite adept at the whole concept of finishing. I mean, and finishing is a sort of, as we well know, a very inexact science. I mean, my personal preference would be for vatting. You have a lot more control over how much of the finishing cask, in inverted commas, goes into the final blend. But, if you're on top of it, if you're there, if you're sussed, but, and certainly seems like Spirit of Yorkshire Distillery are indeed sorted for that. So, yeah, brilliant. Right, okay, so let's move on to the final bottling of the afternoon. This is the Moscatel finish. Let's see what nose gives us on this then, shall we? As can be seen from the previous two, really well balanced nose. Yes, I'm getting the grapey, winey Moscatel character, but again, the spirit is standing up to it amazingly well. Lots of estery white fruit, honey, barley, citrus. Sort of trying to put my finger on it. It's not quite orange. Sort of lime, maybe. It's kind of an inference, shall we say, of citrus rather than an obvious citrus note. It's amazing how you get kind of fixated on these little points, isn't it? Anyway, touch of pepper, bit of spice. Again, lovely nose. Moscatel, often used. It's a sort of a big favourite because it has a big character, but equally needs to be handled with kind of care because of said big character. But yet again, really nicely balanced. Should pass on. Rich, honeyed, grapey, winey, but again quite balanced. I mean, there's a little bittering of the oak on the mid palate and through into the finish, but again, there's so much honey, there's so much white fruit, distillery character, estery fruit. It's all really well balanced, really harmonious, juicy as well. I mean, it is just such a lovely mouthful. I love it. I mean, it's gorgeous. It's the sort of whiskey that I really want to drink. I don't want to sort of. I mean, I don't mind being challenged by a whiskey every now and again, but there's a time and a place for being challenged. And when you sort of want to relax with just a nice whiskey, I'm more than happy to sort of go with one of the Filey Bay bottlings, because they are just a lovely whiskey at the end of the day, and that's a lovely whiskey. Right, okay, so I think I've kind of rattled through these samples rather quickly. Hopefully I've not done them an injustice. So the Masthouse pot and column distilled grain, nice. Really enjoyed that. That was a pleasant whiskey, and it's not too expensive. Yes, it's bottled in 50 cl bottlings, which are around about, I think, 35-ish quid, something like that. So it's about par for the course for sort of like a young English whiskey. The pot and column distilled bottling, like I said, it's estery, it's fruity, so that ticks an awful lot of boxes. It just went over slightly into the sort of confected end of the spectrum, which is what I wasn't overly keen on, it has to be said. And like I said, with the pot still, I'm kind of confused as to what the distillery character is now, because the pots, I mean, I was expecting, I'm assuming that the estery fruitiness came from the pot still distilled proportion. Therefore, I was expecting that to be the characteristic of the pot still whiskey, if you see what I mean. But the pot still whiskey is completely different. It's young barley, no esters, no fruitiness, no anything like that. And so, like I said, the big issue I have with this distillery is I don't know what they're trying to do. I don't know what their distillery character is, what they're trying to achieve, and it's just confusing. But like I said, not horrible. I think if they just iron out some of the wrinkles, and I hope they don't take offence at the comments, but iron out some of those wrinkles, I think they're onto something really good. Wireworks, White Peaks Distillery, yeah, I really like what they're doing. Yes, it's young. Yes, it's got somewhere to go, but I think it's showcasing what the distillery is trying to do. It's setting out their stall, so to speak. It's young, but it's not too young. I think it's sort of released at the right time, shall we say? And I think it's going to be interesting to see how that spirit develops. The IPA finish, really like that. Subtle. Balanced, as all the Filey Bay or Spirit of Yorkshire Distillery bottlings are, and I thought that was really, really nice. I do like IPA finished whiskies. There isn't an awful lot of them about, it has to be said. Double oak, again, I thought that worked really nicely. If you to like that bottling, you are going to have to like a lot of oak. It is about a tenner more expensive than the other two Filey Bay bottlings. I'm assuming that's because virgin oak casks are bloody expensive. Yeah, it's got lots of character, but it's not one-dimensional. It's not an overt oak monster. Yes, there's a lot of oak, but there's some lovely balance there as well. And the same could be said for the Moscatel finish as well. It really kind of like floats my boat, as they say. Balanced, plenty of distillery character, and a judicious amount of finishing casks. So yeah, really, really good. I think this has been a really fun episode. Big thank you to everybody that kindly sent me the samples for today's episode of the show. I hope the individual distilleries involved are not disappointed by my review. It's an honest review. Shoot me if you want. I mean, I think on the whole, I'm really impressed, and I'm really impressed with English distilleries per se, I think. And I really think that they've got sort of something to offer the whiskey drinker. So, yeah, that's this week's episode of the show in the bag. Don't know what I'll be doing next week. There's several options, so I'll have to see where I go. But until then, all that's left to say is hope you have a lovely Easter, if you celebrate Easter wherever you're watching, and I hope you're gorging on good whiskey and Easter eggs. Good dramming and good afternoon.